I've got a few quotes from people that I've talked to over the past couple of weeks about this. Freudis is a vet in Norway who's been actively involved in their screening programme, and she really just wanted to re-emphasise that the screening programme is based on science and good evidence, and actually the view is it's simple, it can be done very easily for your Dachshunds, it's objective, it is based on good science, and actually it's the only tool that we have available to us if we want to try and make an impact on back disease in the breed at the moment. The quiz. Okay, I suggest you work with a colleague on this. We'll do it a question at a time. Question 1. How many Dachshunds are there registered, live registered, Kennel Club registered Dachshunds in the UK at the moment? 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 or 80,000? Registered. Put your hand up if you think it's...
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Put your hand up if you think it's 50,000 registered Dachshunds live in the UK at the moment. 60,000. 70,000. 80,000. Alright, okay. It's probably 60,000. That obviously excludes the ones that aren't Kennel Club registered. That's based on an average registration of 5,000 Dachshunds a year with an average lifespan of 12 years, which gives you 60,000 Kennel Club registered dogs in the UK. Which takes us to the next question. How many of those, on average, in their lifetime will have a back problem? 1 in 20, 1 in 10, 1 in 4, or 1 in 2? Who thinks it's 1 in 10?
It says it here.
Oh, right, okay. To save you having to wait an hour for lunch, just read the back of the handout. Yes, 1 in 4. That figure comes from numerous research studies that have been done over the years. Actually, if you look at the data from our health survey in 2015, if you looked at Dachshunds over the age of 3 years old, something like 30% of them, so 1 in 3 of those dogs had suffered some extent of back disease. If you take that figure...
Can you give an indication of how you come to that figure? Because of all the people I know that have got Dachshunds, 1 in 4 don't have one with a back problem.
Yep, I know that's a figure that people will say, I've never seen it in my line. It's based on numerous studies. There's lots of, for example, data from the Agria insurance database in Scandinavia, and if you look at that data, that's a valid figure. If you look at the data...
Agria in this country?
Agria in Scandinavia.
But that 1 in 4 is from Scandinavia?
No, there's UK data for that as well, and actually the 30% data is from our UK. 1 in 3 of Dachshunds in our 2,000 dogs that we surveyed in 2015 suffered from some degree of back disease. 1 in 3. And if you multiply that, or think that in context of 60,000 dogs, that's a hell of a lot of Dachshunds that have a back problem. How much more likely is a Dachshund to have a back problem than your average dog? 10 to 12 times. That is based on survey data of 600,000 dogs across all breeds. Dachshunds are 10 to 12 times more likely to have a back problem than any other breed, or any other dog on average. Which standard variety has the lowest prevalence of back disease? Wires? Right, okay, jolly good. Pretty shocking when you start looking at the standard smooths. 1 in 4 of those, that's from our survey in 2015. If you looked at our 2012 data, the longs actually came out with the lowest prevalence. in that particular survey. But there is definitely a difference in terms of risk associated with the smooths compared with the longs and the wires. What about the miniatures? Which of the miniatures has the highest prevalence? Mini smooths. Yeah, absolutely. There's not a lot in it. They are marginally more likely to have back problems than the other two varieties.
Do you think it's because they're the originals?
I think it probably is, because the other two varieties have got other dogs in them. So there's some terrier in the wires, there's some spaniel almost certainly in the longs.
Spaniel get trouble.
Some of the Cocker Spaniels particularly have back problems as well. So I think the history of the breed probably accounts for some of those differences between the smooths and the others. And miniaturisation, we know in many breeds, causes additional health problems. So it's probably not surprising that the miniature smooths have a high prevalence in there as well.
The very small miniatures, are they more prone than the up to size miniatures?
I don't have any data on whether the conincians. I don't have any data on whether the conincians are any more likely to have it. You would intuitively expect them to have probably slightly higher. I think the interesting thing from that is actually it gives us a real opportunity to look at genetic causes of intervertebral disc disease and potentially find some ways of avoiding it if there are opportunities associated with the genetics of it, and I'll come back to that. Highest risk age for an IVDD incident? 4 to 7. In our survey in 2015, 76% of the dogs that had had a back problem had it diagnosed between the ages of 4 and 7 years old. It's a really high risk age for them to suffer. The other bit of data that I probably should have mentioned when we're just on question 2, 1 in 4 with a back problem during their lifetime, what proportion of those get put to sleep? About 10%. 10% of those that suffer from a back problem get put to sleep. And again, if you take that in the context of the number of dogs that are around, that's an awful lot of traumatised owners and very badly affected Dachshunds. And you will know the answer to the next question because it's on the card in front of you. Okay. 24 to 48 months, and I'll talk about why is 24 to 48 months the recommended age for our screening programme. Right, hopefully you've got a picture of the context. How did we arrive at a UK screening programme? This is a comment again from a miniature wire breeder in Sweden. Now that I've x-rayed 6 generations, the challenge is finding males that are x-rayed and also respond to my other wishes. So there's a really clear message around we have to look at the whole dog. It's not just like we need to reject this from the gene pool because it's got a particular issue associated with it. We've seen the problems that causes with Cord1 PRA. A lot of people in the very early days rejecting the use of carriers in Cord1 PRA, and I think that comes back to bite you a little bit later. So we need to take a balanced view of it. And Lotta says, I hope my UK breeder friends will join the ride. I'm not quite sure what she means by the ride. I guess it's a roller coaster ride probably for some breeders to make our breed more healthy. Let's talk about back disease. Underpinning the screening programme is the idea that Dachshund spines, the discs degenerate, and calcification or mineralisation of the discs is what happens in the breed. And in the Dachshund breed, it starts at a much younger age than it does in dogs with normal length legs. And actually you can start to see the calcifications often from 12 months onwards. And the history of the screening programme in the Scandinavian countries is based on the research that says there's a good correlation between the number of calcifications in the spine and the risk of a dog having a herniation. Calcifications can be seen on x-rays, which is why it's an x-ray screening programme. And the other bit of evidence from the research is that dogs with many calcifications also produce puppies with many calcifications. Those of you that have come across back problems in your dogs will probably know that it's not unusual to see that it runs in lines. Let's just have a check on how many people have had a dog with a back problem. Okay. How many people have bred a dog with a back problem? Okay. I'm not sure whether we're 1 in 4, but there's enough people putting hands up in the room to say that it's around. And again, the point that dogs with high calcifications produce puppies with high calcifications is another reason for the screening program. We need to try and reduce the number of calcifications on average that dogs have, because they will produce puppies with fewer calcifications, and if we have puppies with fewer calcifications, there will be a lower risk of herniations. What is going on? This is a slide that I've borrowed from Rowena Packer, who spoke at our neurology seminar in 2014. The picture at the top left is a healthy spine. So if you look at the discs in a healthy dog, the centre of the disc is like it's a jelly-like substance. As the dog gets older and the disc starts to degenerate, it dries out, it mineralises, and it becomes calcified. And what you end up with is the jelly-like material extruding out from the disc and impinging on the spinal cord. And that's what causes the back pain and what causes the paralysis. And the MRI scan picture over here shows you an example of a herniation where a disc is bulging out and touching on the spine. Bless you. Don't do your back in having a sneeze.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Let me share some data with you around the link between calcifications and back disease. A study in 2001 showed that dogs without any calcifications, fewer than 1 in 10 of those had back disease, had herniations. Whereas dogs with more than 4 calcifications in their spine, 2/3 of those had symptoms of IVDD. And symptoms of IVDD ranges from minor back pain through to a full-blown herniation. Data from the Danish Dachshund Club last year, they published some data around dogs that had been screened and surveyed last year. Dogs with 5 or more calcifications were 48 times more likely to have a prolapsed or herniated disc than dogs with less than 5 calcifications.
Do you have any figures for the dogs in Denmark? How many are in the categories of calcifications 1 to 2?
I do, and I will share that with you later. Yes, I've got data on 3,500 dogs from the Nordic countries, which I'll share with you. And that sort of data is replicated in a number of research papers which go back at least 20 years. What have we been doing to try and address back disease in UK Dachshunds? I guess if I had to summarise, probably not enough and not fast enough, given how long it's been around. I've got a copy of the Dachshund Club newsletter from 50 years ago where there's an article on Dachshunds with back problems, and actually we've not really made an awful lot of difference or progress since then. One of the papers that stimulated a lot of thought and concern around the Breed Council's Health Committee was Rowena Packer's paper in 2013, How Long and Low Can You Get? Anybody remember seeing that at all? Yeah. The longer they are, the shorter their legs, the higher the risk of having back problems. Now, Rowena looked at a relatively small number of dogs, and you could arguably say, well, they were dogs that had been referred to the Royal Veterinary College Hospital, so they were a subset of the population at large. But her data did suggest that if you breed them longer, and Mandy talked about we need moderately long and we need short loins as well, to give that strength in the top line. Interestingly, when we did our 2015 Dachs Health breed survey, we couldn't replicate those findings. We asked people to measure the length and the height of their dogs, and we couldn't replicate the findings that the longer they were, the more likely they were to have back problems. Not quite sure what to make of that. What else have we tried? We had a flirt with infrared cameras. Some of you may have brought dogs. I know Pat brought a dog. Other people brought, Tina brought dogs to the Southern.
3 months later.
Back when 3 months later.
And she said there's nothing wrong with her.
Yeah. So we had a look to see whether infrared scanning of dogs' backs would be an indicator of back problems. The issue that we had with that, in the long-coated and the wire-coated varieties, the coat interfered with the infrared pattern, so it really wasn't indicative, and we didn't have enough evidence to be able to say that's a robust way of identifying whether there's a risk of back disease. Interestingly, I think in the French Bulldogs they are using infrared screening to look at the risk of some of the spinal problems that they have in the French Bulldogs.
With the infrared screening, because I know we've used it, before you do the screening, did they tell you about all the rules that you're allowed to follow for it? You're not allowed, the dog may not get wet or damp at all 24 hours before the time. You may not put a collar on it for 24 hours before the time. And all those type of things influence the quality of the screening.
Yeah, I don't know, I can't recall whether we covered that sort of stuff, but it wasn't going to, I just don't think it was going to work, basically. What else have we done? We sent some DNA swab samples to the Animal Health Trust. We took samples from 50 Dachshunds over the age of 10 that hadn't had a back problem, and 50 Dachshunds that had had a back problem between the ages of 4 and 7, to see whether they could find, and some of you will have participated in that, to see whether they could find a genetic difference between herniated dogs and non-herniated dogs, and they couldn't.
Is there any data to show whether or not dogs that are longer in loin as opposed to longer in overall back length?
Again, we don't have the data on length of loin and to see whether that makes a difference. One of the bits of research that we're doing with the current screening program may help us get to that. I'll touch on that a little bit later. What we now have is the Give a Dog a Genome project, and again we had some amazing fundraising from people at the beginning of last year. The focus of that study, again with the Animal Health Trust, is to look at whether, when they look at a Dachshund's genome compared with other breeds, there is anything significantly different that might be an indication of why Dachshunds are particularly prone to back problems. And at the top right, the Dachs Life 2015 study, where we had 2,000 dogs, and there were some really interesting insights. Some of you may have had an opportunity to look at some of the data and results from that. That was mainly focused on lifestyle factors, which I think do have an impact. The way that you keep your dog, the way that you bring it up, the exercise it, body condition, those sorts of things that Mandy talked about, all of those are important. But in the overall scheme of things, compared with the genetic risk of it, we're tweaking at the edges.
When I went to the AHG for a totally unrelated thing last year, I spoke to a geneticist there, just chatting, and she said that some years ago they'd done one of the people there had done a minor research on it because of the number of Dachshunds that were coming in with back problems, and her personal theory, nothing in her own personal theory, was that there are within the breed certain dogs which do not carry enough muscle alongside the backbone, and that if you stroke your dog and he is not overweight, if you can feel that backbone, obviously it's much more likely to have IVDD than those that have got consistent muscle either side of the spine, and a flat field at the back. That's her theory.
No, and I go along with that. And there is a research paper that suggests the more muscle they have around the spine, the less likely they are to have back problems. And it ties in with some of the lifestyle data about the dogs that get more exercise. Once they're mature, once they're fully mature, are less likely to have back problems. And the other interesting thing, which was a real surprise, the more Dachshunds you have, the less likely they are to have back problems. And you can build a case to understand why that might be, because they probably play together and exercise together, and you can't leave them in the house because they'll destroy the place, so you have to take them out for exercise. So it was really, really fascinating. Owners of single Dachshunds were more likely to have back problems than owners of
Maybe they're
two
not
or
as
more.
fit as they're carried around.
I was going to say
And it may just be that they're carried around and not exercised. So I think the lifestyle factor thing is really, really interesting. The muscle around the back also. You know.
They say that in humans, don't they?
Yeah, and I think there's some human research around the back muscle. So keeping them fit clearly is important, but again, let me give you an off the top of the head view. I think 80 to 85% of it is in the genes of the Dachshund, and 5 to 10% of it we might be able to influence through lifestyle factors. "75 years ago, that book, it's shocking really that in 75 years really very little has changed in terms of actually trying to address back disease in Dachshunds. The Danish screening programme started in 2001, the Australians started in 2010. I've got data from the Nordic countries which I'll share with you, and we started our programme in November last year. I put that little cartoon up on Facebook a few months back, which really is a sort of call to action. You know, just waiting and hoping that in another 75 years something magical will happen.
Or ignoring it.
We're ignoring it. Many of you will know Marie, who has a mini wire that ended up being put to sleep. She was one of the early enthusiasts for having her dog screened. She had a mini wire back, whose back was x-rayed. She had 9 calcifications, which is a really high number of calcifications in the spine. And sadly, but probably not surprisingly, if you believe the data and the research, she ended up with herniations and ended up being put to sleep. Right, the screening process is on the infographic. 5-stage process. If your Dachshund is between the ages of 24 and 48 months, and you're going to breed from it, then you can participate in our programme. And we talked about in the health committee, should we open it up to all Dachshunds? And the view was we should focus on dogs that are going to be bred from, because actually if you're not going to breed from the dog, knowing the result won't make any difference. If it's low or it's high, you're not going to do anything different to that dog in terms of reducing its risk for back disease. And the focus is on trying to reduce the risk for future generations by selecting those dogs. Book an appointment at one of our screening centres. We're working in partnership with the CVS veterinary group, and Dawn Norton is hiding somewhere in the audience, works with CVS. She'll be more than happy to talk to you about where there's a clinic available to you. That's not to say you can't use your own vet, and if you go on our IVDD website, you can find copies of the protocols from Norway and from Finland, that if you want to go to your own vet, you can take those, and there are also contact details for the people that are doing the scoring, so you can send the x-rays to those people as well. We've got what we believe is a good deal out of CVS in terms of the cost of doing those x-rays. You're probably talking about 5 x-rays for a miniature and maybe 6 for a standard, and they only need to be sedated lightly. They don't need to be fully put under. So take your dog to be x-rayed, sign the consent form, pay the fee for the screening, and the breed council will pay for the x-rays to be scored. And we're using a vet in Finland, Anu, who will be doing all the scoring. So we have a single person doing the scoring so that we get absolute consistency looking at the x-rays.
Is that going to be recognised as a Kennel Club screening programme?
We hope to take the same approach as we did with Lafora. When we've got sufficient results, we will go to the Kennel Club and say, here's a test that's proven in the Nordic countries, here is a set of data from the UK, we'd like you to make it a formal screening programme. But until we have sufficient data and proof that people are participating, the Kennel Club won't be approached to do that.
I'm quite concerned that a lot of people will breed from their dogs before the 2 years and use it as an excuse like, oh, I can't x-ray them yet because they're not
Yep.
2 yet.
That is a danger or a risk that people, and many people will choose to breed from their dogs before they're 2 years old. The screening programme, the minimum age is 24 months, and that's because, again, the data suggests that's the max, that point in time is the best time to screen them. Beyond 48 months, some of the calcifications can disappear, and again, if you're interested in the science behind that, that is again described on the website. So 24 to 48 months is the optimum period.
If and when are the results being made public? Because having been at the beginning of hip dysplasia in new breeds past the shepherds, goldies and labradors, in a breed that was totally unrelated to those, nobody would do it if they thought it was published.
Yep.
And for the first 2 years they kept it quiet and it wasn't published. And a lot of people, including myself, had a lot of dogs x-rayed, chose to change our breeding programmes quietly and under the radar and improved our dogs, we thought. As soon as it became public, it went like that.
Okay. Can I hold that for a discussion at the end? Because that is something that I do specifically want to ask people about in terms of their views.
And how much does it cost?
That is £300. The x-rays. We've applied to the Kennel Club Charitable Trust for a grant. That's not been through the Charitable Trust yet. If we get the money that we've asked for, we hope we might be able to bring that down to £200. You'll get the results back by email from Anu. She sends the results to the Breed Council Health Committee as well, and also to the veterinary practice where you have the dog screened. And one of the things that we're asking you to do with the screening programme is participate in an annual survey, because we want to find out 12 months, 24 months, 36 months after you've had the dog screened, has it had back problems or has any of its offspring had back problems? We want to use this as a way of gathering further information about the effectiveness of the screening programme. Question?
Right. What if you've already bred from the bitch? She's 5 now, puppies are gone, and everybody's happy, the bitch is okay. What happens now?
If you've bred from a bitch and
you bred from the bitch,
and
she's 5 now,
and it's 5.
and the puppies are gone,
Yep.
happy with their owners,
Yep.
no comeback.
No.
What happens from there?
Well, nothing happens from there.
No, right, okay. So if those people want to breed on from there,
Yep.
you ask them to get it scanned.
I would suggest if you have sold puppies to people who want to breed from them, you should be encouraging them to participate in the screening programme when those puppies are between 2 and 4 years old. If you've bred and the bitch is now too old to be screened, then we've missed that window of opportunity to have the dog screened. But we need to be encouraging people who are going to be breeding when the time is right to go through that process as well.
Do you have a Facebook page or a web page or a something for this?
Both.
Okay.
There is a Facebook group and there is a website, and I'll put the links at the end of the presentation. So the screening process, the dog is lightly sedated and 5 or 6 x-rays are taken across the full length of the spine. Now here's a good test for anybody. How many discs are there in a canine spine?
One more than there are.
One more.
A lot. Than there are vertebrae.
One more than there are vertebrae is a really good answer. Yes, because there's one between each of the vertebrae. Who wants to have a guess? How many biology teachers sat here who should probably know the answer? 29, I'll put you out of your misery. After the L7.
Not including
S1.
the tail.
So the worst possible score you can have is 29. That is highly, highly, highly unlikely. I think the worst score that I've seen on any screen dog was 13 calcifications.
We bumped into a standard smooth at Southern Counties who was on his 9th operation.
9th back operation.
Obviously, he doesn't have reoccurring.
What do the results mean? Okay, you will get a score which tells you how many calcifications have been counted between the vertebrae in your dog along the length of the spine. You'll also get told the location of those calcifications. They're graded into 4 categories. If you have no calcifications, that is category IDC 0. That's a great score to have. 1 or 2 is IDC 1. 3 to 4 is IDC 2. And this is the advice that the Scandinavians are giving to their breeders. If your dog has more than 5 calcifications, it shouldn't be bred from. Now, they are able to adopt that approach. They have a different approach to their breed clubs and managing their health schemes in the Nordic countries. That's their advice. And I'll show you some data in terms of how many dogs are there coming in with each of those ranges of scores.
Does it matter along the spine where? Is it worse at the front or the back, or
Now, I do have the answer to that question. The research paper that I looked at, 35% of the herniations occur between T12 and T13, which is right in the middle. So a third of them happen right in the middle of the spine. 75% of them happen between T12, 13 and L1, L2. So it's that bridge between the thoracic and the lumbar region, which is most...
That's not where the loin is, though. It's a bit
the
further.
loin is further back down here, but it's the bridge between the end of the rib cage, and where the loin starts. And the data that we have from our breed survey in 2012, 85% of dogs with back problems had them in the back, and 15% had them in the neck.
So when you're counting the scores, it's the whole, including the neck, the lumbar.
We're looking at the whole length of the spine.
And that's one score.
And you get the number of calcifications, the position of those calcifications, and then they get graded into one of those 4 categories.
And that score doesn't matter where they are.
No. So, sorry, lots of questions. I'm conscious of time.
The ones that there's calcification in the neck,
Yeah.
can it be caused by the dogs pulling on lead?
Interesting.
And you know what they do? They suddenly go, ooh.
Yeah. Interesting question. If you look at our lifestyle survey data, dogs that were walked on harnesses were more likely to have back problems than dogs that were walked on collars. Liz, question.
So should the same rigour be applied to bitches as dogs, or should you be looking for a stud dog with a low calcification?
In an ideal world, we would have lots of data from lots of dogs, and you'd have lots of choice about where to go. Clearly, if you have a bitch that is in categories 1 or 2, looking for a stud dog with low calcifications would be an ideal choice.
would you say the sort of construction of the dog, so say if it's got a dipping top line or one that's rising over the crib, because it's squashing the vertebrae?
Again, we don't have any data. What we're doing through the research programme, and I know Joe has a dog screen.
I was just going to follow on from Tina actually, because it would be so good if they could actually grade them in 3 different areas, because if they did that, then you'd know when you're putting them to another dog, you can utilise that, because we've got 3 in the neck, but then nothing in the area where they actually go down.
So we have all that data, and we can start looking at what patterns emerge. But we're we've got so few dogs at the moment that it really wouldn't be safe to draw any particular conclusions around that. I'm going to ask Joe, as one of the pioneers, did the vet take a picture of your dog as well, a photograph of your dog?
I think the staff were, I don't know if he did.
You can't remember, okay. Because one of the things we want to do is to try and take pictures of the dogs that are being screened to see whether we can pick up.
Are they measuring them? Did they measure them?
No, I couldn't do that. I keep forgetting to do it. But no, they didn't. I've got tons of pictures I can take with anyone's angle.
Mandy.
Hi. You said that after 4, that the calcifications disappear.
Yeah.
So dogs that are between 4 and 4.5 or whatever, but people want to have them done, they won't have a score that's realistic.
You can do it, but in terms of validity against the historical data from the research, the cut-off point that they put in Scandinavia is 48 months. You might get a high score, you might get a low score, but because the calcifications can disappear...
Why do they disappear? How do they disappear?
I don't want to go into the science of it, that's not me copying out. There is an answer on the website, it's got very long words. I'll just say phagocyte to you. Right? What results might we expect? This is some data from Sweden. Nearly 200 dogs x-rayed in Sweden, and the numbers of calcifications. 80% of their dogs in that sample had 0 to 4 calcifications. A fifth of them had 5 or more calcifications. So it does tail off. They've got a very small number of dogs that have 10 or more calcifications in there.
Is that data from today or current data?
It is current data.
So do we have something from when before they started their programme? Is there anything to show us that they've made progress?
I have got some data to show that they've made progress, and I'll put a quote up with that data in a minute. It's been small but significant. 3,500 dogs from Norway, Sweden, Denmark and Finland. 24% of those dogs had no calcifications, 58% 1 to 4 calcifications, and 18% of those dogs had 5 or more calcifications. That's the full set of data from those 3,500 dogs, split across the different varieties. And I don't expect you to take in all the data, but we do have that information, and I'll be sharing the slides with you after the workshop. Interestingly, the mini smooths have the smallest proportion of dogs with few calcifications, which does tend to tie in with the higher risk of back problems in the miniature smooths. I don't think they're seeing quite the same patterns between the longs and the wires as we're seeing. But certainly the Nordic dogs are probably overrepresented by wires and mini wires compared with the other two coats. And this is a quote from Anu, who's the vet that is doing the scoring for us. Based on our study in Finland, positive genetic gain is evident, and that's on just the dogs that she looked at, the trend over time of the dogs that she looked at in Finland. Some breeders are screening their dogs, and they're now using dogs that have 0 or very few calcifications, and their results are good. In Denmark, she says the program has been more effective than in Finland. I don't have the time series data. I will try and get that to show what the difference is. The data in that report suggests about a 5% improvement or a 5% reduction in the risk factor over the period that the data are there. It's not massive, but when you think about 60,000 Dachshunds, 5%, if we can make a difference to 5% of them. We have to see this as a 10, 15, 20-year program. Should I breed with a dog that has 5 or more calcifications? If you lived in the Nordic countries, they would be saying that you shouldn't be doing that. Denmark, the Danish Kennel Club will now no longer register Dachshund puppies that haven't been screened. The Swedish breed clubs are in the process of having a conversation along similar lines about how rigorous they want to be about requiring screening to be done in Sweden.
How long are they doing this?
Pardon?
How long?
24 to 48 months.
Yeah, but you were saying that they won't register puppies until they've been...
No, they won't register puppies from parents that haven't been screened. Sorry, apologies. They won't register puppies from...
I think you're doing it late week.
No, not an 8-week-old puppies. We have so few dogs that have been screened at the moment. If you get a result that is 5 or more calcifications, it's going to be almost impossible to go out and say, can I find a stud dog with no calcifications to breed with? You do need to be asking yourself some of these serious questions about, is there a history in that pedigree of back problems, and making the decision of whether it's ethical or not, now that you have that data, to breed from those dogs. What we can't do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a risk of making genetic diversity even worse if we throw 20% of the dogs out of the gene pool. We have to do this steadily and carefully over a period of time. But if we don't do it, we won't make any progress. We've had 6 dogs screened in the UK since the scheme launched in November. And those are the results of the 6 dogs that we've had. Interestingly, it's about 1 in 5, like the Scandinavians, with more than 5 calcifications. I know it's an incredibly small sample, it's not statistically valid, but of those 6 dogs, only 1 of them had more than 5 calcifications. And Joe very kindly gave us a quote, which is on the slide there. There's not going to be an overnight cure for this. We do need to see it as a long-term programme, and if we participate in it, hopefully we can make a difference to our breed over a period of time. One of the folks that I met when I was out in Australia breeds Standard Smooths. They've been doing screening since 2010, and Kevin said, I'm pleased to say we're now 7 years into our programme, and we're now starting to see parents with 0 calcifications. They started with Standard Smooths that had high numbers of calcifications. The screening programme has reduced calcifications, and they are seeing the benefits coming through from that.
Is he talking about his own kennels? Or?
That's him talking about his own kennels.
And how much did it get reduced by? Percentage?
Sorry, how much?
How much did the percentage reduce by?
The percentage of
The amount?
calcifications.
Yeah.
I don't have his original data, but he's now saying that they're breeding dogs with 0s. And he specifically, when I was out there, he was talking about the highs and the lows of having to take dogs out of their breeding programme because they had high numbers of calcifications.
Hey, what's the chances of it being 0 at 24 months, but 5 at 48 months?
Low, I would have thought. Where are we going? At some point, we need to publish the screening results for these. And that's a discussion I'd like to have with people about when should we publish those screening results. Annual surveys of the dogs that have been screened. Take DNA samples for the Animal Health Trust so that we can do more genome studies. We will apply to the Kennel Club to make it an official scheme at a point where we have sufficient data and evidence. And this is exactly, this has parallels with hips and elbows. We can go down the route of estimated breeding values. They are now using estimated breeding values in Denmark, and that's their approach. So you can look at dogs that have been screened and their offspring and be better informed about the likely risks if you put a particular pair of dogs together to breed from. And if we get a grant from the Kennel Club Charitable Trust, we're also going to look at whether using CT scans might be more discriminating than X-rays as a way of doing the screening. Overall, to summarise our strategy on back disease from the Breed Council, we conducted the lifestyle survey, we've published that data, That gives people some information around how to manage the husbandry of a Dachshund. We're offering an X-ray screening program. Once we have sufficient data, you should be able to make better informed choices about dogs that you can use to breed from. We may go down the route of a CT screening program, and at some point we may have some genetic insights into opportunities to improve the health of the breed from that perspective.
Ian, has the Kennel Club indicated their preferred approach to this, or if they have an approach to it?
We've had a couple of meetings with people from the Kennel Club, and they've not expressed an opinion on a preferred approach. They've looked at all the research papers, they've worked with us, and they're aware that we're doing this program. When we've got sufficient data, we'll go back and say, this is something that we'd like to formalise. So I'll leave you with a quote from the great Malcolm Willis. All breeders will produce defects if they breed long enough. Those who tell you that they do not produce defects have either stopped breeding, breed hardly at all, or are being economical with the truth. There is no crime in producing a defect. The crime, if any, lies in what you do about it. If you bury yours quickly and keep quiet about it, and if I do the same with mine, sooner or later we may use each other's dogs and pay the penalty for not having been honest. And the breed will suffer as a consequence. I'll leave you with that thought. The links that you wanted to look for more information, we have a website, dachshundivdd.uk, and a Facebook page. The link to the Facebook page is on the website as well. I'll put the slides on the Breed Council website tonight.
Right, can I ask you to thank you? Around the rest of the day if you want to pop and ask.
We do need to have the conversation about publishing the results, so please come and talk with me over lunch and give me your views on that.
Can I just quickly say one thing, because I'm on a lot of Facebook groups, pet Facebook groups, and I would say there is at least one dog going down with IVD on average every day. And I think possibly, if you're in the show world, you may not be looking at that, you may not be aware of that. The other thing as well is there are an awful lot of pet owners out there who don't realise that they should be telling the breeder of their dogs about what is happening. So although obviously you're saying you've never bred a dog that's had IVD, unless you know every single puppy that is bred from birth to death, and indeed any of those puppies that have actually gone on to these dogs themselves with IVD, you cannot know. So I'm sure a lot of people, I'm sure you're all breeding for the best, so please just bear that in mind.
I think we need to start limiting.
Pardon?
We should put it in our contract.
Let us know if you have back problems. Yeah, absolutely.
I think if people see it on Facebook, say, I hope your dog does well. Have you told your breeder?
Have you told your breeder?
Thank you
Thank you very much.